What if I told you that Andor's Narkina 5 arc is a masterpiece, not just for the story, but for the hidden details that creator Tony Gilroy carefully put into every episode? For instance, how tight, claustrophobic shots are used to show how the Empire is tightening its grip in response to the Aldhani raid, or how characters are framed against windows a lot in these episodes, representing how trapped they currently feel. These touches are deliberately placed by the filmmakers, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. And once you notice them, you can't help but wonder, why? What are the filmmakers trying to say with these touches? There's many details present in the Narkina 5 arc that really unifies what Andor is trying to say. To show you what I mean, let's go back to episode 7 of season 1, Announcement. The cinematography in this episode is some of the best in Andor, and right off the bat, we get a lot of very tight shots on the faces of the ISB supervisors, while Colonel Yularen says this:
"Be here this morning and know that the only question we need to answer is how tight to close our fist."
I loved how the camera work reinforces this claustrophobic feeling with these ultra zoomed in shots, and this claustrophobic feeling runs throughout the entirety of the Narkina 5 arc, showing the Empire's response to the raid on Aldhani. The most obvious example of this is the jail on Narkina 5, but there's many others, like when Dedra questions Cyril in the Empire interrogation room, or when Bix gets interrogated on Ferrix, or when this K2SO droid puts Andor against a wall and chokes him, or these ultra close-up shots of the judge who sentences Andor to 6 years on Narkina 5. There's also spoken references, like in episode 7 when Luthen tells Mon,
"The Empire has been choking us so slowly we're starting not to notice. The time has come to force their hand."
I also thought the shots of Andor's Narkina 5 crew tightening screws and parts at their table plays into this theme as well. I particularly like this shot of Ham struggling so hard to tighten something that his eyes nearly bulge out of his skull, showing the impact of the Empire tightening their grip on him while he tightens pieces for each rack. What the Empire doesn't know is that they're winding the galaxy so tight it's only a matter of time before it becomes undone. Vel tells Mon in episode 9,
"You're one to worry about. Trapped here, boxed in."
Lonnie feels similar pressure as a mole in the ISB, telling Luthen,
"I can't do this anymore."
In Narkina 5, they have a box that inmates go to get shocked at the end of the day, and they all go back to their boxed-in cells after each shift. And Dedra threatens to put Cyril in a cage on the Outer Rim in episode 9 after he comes to visit her outside ISB headquarters.
"You come near me again, you pursue any of this, and I swear I'll have you in a cage on the Outer Rim."
This all ties into two other common themes in this arc, one of which are the lines, boundaries, and rules of the Empire. In episode 7, Dedra has a spirited discussion with Partagaz and Blevins, saying,
"Do you really think the rebels care about the lines we draw on maps?"
Later in that same conversation, Blevins says to Dedra,
"Imagine if everyone in this room played as loose with the rules as you."
Excellent suggestion, Blevin.
which connects back to this tightening motif we've been talking about. On Narkina 5, the workers delivering Andor to his room are obsessed with protocols and schedules, aka rules.
"Where's your partner?"
"They had a tech problem on one."
"Delivery takes priority over tech."
And the saying "on program" is repeated ad nauseum in this storyline.
"On program." That means hands on head, eyes front, feet on the floor.
"Hold your program! On program! On program! Now!"
In my video on Andor's first arc, I talked about how Empire architecture is very angular and rigid, while that of the Rebels is more circular and round. This architecture perfectly represents the rules and boundaries the Empire places on the galaxy. Many times in Narkina 5, we hear characters say stuff like, "Keep your men in line."
"You want to keep your men in line?"
There's lots of talk about getting in line and staying in line, and the straight lines that the Empire features in their architecture represents this authoritarian approach. Out of this theme of rules and boundaries springs another theme, and that's one of games and playing. Kino tells Andor in episode 8,
"You play against all the other tables in this room. I play against all the other rooms."
I didn't think much of this until, in episode 10, I heard Davos Skuldrin say this to Mon Mothma.
The Empire's new regulations, made without Senate consultation, I might add, are as cumbersome as they are avoidable.
They've made a game of it, and we play.
The Empire's regulations, or rules, can almost be seen like lines on a playing field, and everybody is supposed to play within those lines. As the Empire tightens its grip, those lines get closer and closer together until there's little to no space left to play inside. It's deliciously ironic because as the Empire tightens its grip on the galaxy, it actually takes measures to free its own hands and how it operates. Colonel Yularen says in Episode 7,
The Emperor will be convening an emergency session of the Senate to propose a legislation package of bills and amendments that will free our hands in all matters of surveillance, search, and seizure.
Remember how Blevins said to Dedra, "Imagine if everyone in this room played as loose with the rules as you"? Remember Partagaz's reaction? He loves it, and actually takes it as a suggestion. Ironic how an empire which loves enforcing rules throws them out the window at the first sight of trouble. Ironic how Dedra must be a rebel in her own workplace to get anything useful done. The Empire uses the tools of the rebels, more freedom, to preserve order, and like Luthen says in his Episode 10 monologue,
I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them.
Another ironic piece of dialogue is what Skaldrin tells Mon about boundaries.
Many cultures don't fully appreciate the clarity of the Chandrilan marriage. Even our own people are confused at times. Boundaries can be liberating. The old ways have value.
These 4 sentences of dialogue are jam-packed with delicious irony. Chandrilan marriages have clarity because they are arranged. Skolden says boundaries can be liberating, and they actually can be, in the sense that you don't have to think about who you're going to fall in love with, or when will I find the right person. The decision is made based on established rules and customs, removing ambiguity, replacing it with clarity. Skolden seems to imply there's a certain freedom in not having to make complicated decisions. Later in this conversation, after Davo floats the idea of setting his son up with Mon's daughter, he says,
Our position sometimes makes decisions for us, don't you find?
This is such masterful writing, because that's exactly what happens with Luthen, Lonnie, Vel, and other rebels in Season 1. Luthen, to fight the Empire, has to sacrifice Krieger's men even though he could save them. His hands are tied in how he can operate. Even though he's fighting for freedom, he needs to use order and discipline to achieve his goals. Dedra, at one point, says that Luthen runs a very disciplined operation.
Axis obviously runs a very disciplined operation, and one that's large enough to not be reliant on any one network or supplier.
Mon is in a very precarious situation too. She needs access to her money, but she must sacrifice her own daughter to get access to it. Davos says our position sometimes makes decisions for us. Well, it's not just Mon's position as senator that makes decisions for her, but the situations she finds herself in as a rebel. Same with Lonnie. He's fighting for freedom and wants to leave his position at the ISB. But to do the job correctly, he must sacrifice that freedom and stay in the ISB to attain this goal. His position makes him valuable and makes that decision to stay for him. In my Aldhani Arc video, I talked about how the Empire weaponizes choice, giving citizens many bad options to hide the fact that they've, in fact, given them nothing. I also talked about how, for the rebels, they're only focused on one choice, whether to rebel or not. The Narkina 5 arc seems to show the other side of the coin, how our choice to rebel ironically leads to us having less and less freedom as we pursue that revolution. Andor's 3rd arc is all about the cost of rebellion, the real cost of it, and the jungle of irony you must navigate through to attain it. While Mon talks to Skolden, she's framed against these tall windows in her house. It's funny, because in Episode 8, a few party guests talk about these very windows.
Ah, here she is, your embassy hostess. The question was, how many hours a day do we stand here admiring the view?
Windows are a huge theme in this arc, and in this scene where Mon talks with Skolden, they give a sense of how exposed Mon feels in this moment. She's opening herself up to someone who does business for very shady people, and she's letting him see inside the windows to her soul to get the financial freedom she wants. At the end, she tells him she's not considering his marriage proposal.
It's a lot to think about.
I'm not thinking about it.
That's the first untrue thing you've said.
He's seeing inside the window to her soul. He is reading her like a book with perfect clarity. I also like how Tay, Mon, and Skolden are positioned in this shot. It feels like Mon's sitting between two wolves here or something, isolated by herself on the couch, exposed. Mon's windows kind of remind you of the ones from Luthen's shop, which has a storefront made of glass. And if you remember, there's a big window near the back of the shop where Luthen and Clea can see who's coming in at any given time. I like the difference in how the front of the shop is a bright, clear space, and the back of the shop is dark and shady. It's a perfect representation for Luthen, who looks one way on the outside, but is a rebel at heart. And that's one of the primary things that windows represent in these episodes: the truth. It makes characters who are hiding something feel trapped. For instance, the windows in Cyril's interrogation room where he tells the truth about the Empire's incompetence. He feels very trapped here. In Episode 7, Dedra says the Empire is playing into the rebels' hands as she looks out the window.
This is exactly what they want.
She feels trapped because she feels she can't do anything to change how the Empire operates. In Episode 8, there's this interesting transition where we see Vel and Cinta both looking out a window. Earlier in that episode, Cinta reminds Vel that the rebellion comes first and everything else comes second. They feel trapped, relegated to looking out at the world through their prison cell, yearning for something they know they can't have: the freedom to be together. Windows really do invoke a prison-like feel, don't they? It's obviously perfect for this Narkina 5 arc. For instance, in both the Aldhani arc and this arc, Cyril is shown many times looking out his window in his room. He's trapped with his mother, trapped in his position as a guy who's screwed up his whole career, and these shots show that feeling perfectly. Windows also play a big part in the Narkina 5 jail, specifically the bridges, which have long rows of windows that inmates use to speak with each other. It seems like windows obviously have two sides, one from the inside that's more cramped, and one from the outside that has a view of the world and feels very open and expansive. This more open side of the window represents the freedom, the better life that these characters crave. During the prison break scene in Episode 10, there's many shots of inmates looking up at the windows above, seeing flashes of blaster fire through them. They could have just had the doors open and watched the fight spill out into the workroom, but no, we see the fight framed through these windows. Also, there's a moment when an inmate looks through the window to a room, and we see the Empire workers hiding there, trying not to make a sound. They're the ones in jail now. I said Episode 7 has amazing cinematography, and one of my favorite shots is this one of Andor where he's framed through these tiny circular windows at the beach. We know he's about to get arrested, and framing him through these tiny windows show the net closing in around him. One last thing about windows. In this arc, the Empire frees their own hands in matters of surveillance, and I think the windows serve to reinforce this feeling as well. The Empire strikes back in this arc, and workers like Dedra are able to get information, connect dots, and just see more clearly because of this newfound operational freedom. For instance, Bix gets interrogated, and with the barbaric methods of Dr. Gorst, the Empire is able to get all the information it needs out of its victims. It's able to see through them as if they're looking through a window to their soul. It's chilling. Speaking of Bix's interrogation, this touches on another theme present in the Narkina 5 arc, and that's one of sound and listening. Episode 7 is called Announcement, and Episode 9 is called Nobody's Listening. Both relate to sound, don't they? Other references to sound are Luthen's radio and how Bix sends messages to it across the galaxy. Andor yells in Episode 9 that "Nobody's listening!" And as Mon talks to the Senate in that same episode, senators turn off their lights one by one, signaling that they aren't listening to what she's saying. Kino loses patience at one point and says that
it takes a week for one word to get all the way up here, and you're panicking about something that's happening on the other side of the building!
And later he says,
"We have heard nothing."
When rumors get out about the Empire frying a whole level in the jail complex. And why did they fry a whole level? Because word gets out that an inmate was transferred to another level instead of going free. So what does it mean? At one point, Clea says that
receiving messages is just as dangerous as sending them. You should keep that in mind.
That one sentence explains this sound theme perfectly. In this arc, characters struggle with receiving messages. Andor has trouble receiving the message from Marva that there is no hiding from the Empire anymore. The fight is everywhere now. Kino has trouble receiving the message that the sentences are made up and he's not going anywhere. Vel has trouble receiving the message from Cinta that their relationship comes second in the fight against the Empire. And Mon has trouble receiving the message that, in order to accomplish the cause she's invested herself in, she needs to sacrifice her family and her ideals, which is something she's always had held dear as a senator. If you pay attention, there's one scene where Luthen's listening to his radio, and on the wall behind him, a gun is pointed towards his head. The set designers could have made this wall naked, or put some other decoration on it, but no, they put a blaster pointed directly at his face on this wall. It showcases the theme of receiving a message is just as dangerous as sending it perfectly. And to circle back to Bix's interrogation, I actually think it's a horrifying yet powerful representation of the danger and impact of hearing certain things, like the truth. We can see it on Kino's face as he realizes his sentence really is made up. We can see it on Mon's face as she realizes she needs to sacrifice her daughter for the cause. The truth is horrifying. Sometimes receiving a message and actually considering it is the most devastating thing that can happen to us. For the rebels, listening to the message that the Empire is evil and internalizing it is a death sentence. It means you're either going to become a hero and fight against it, or be a coward and betray your own values. It's a scary situation to be in, and Andor handles this idea perfectly in episodes 7 through 10. In my next video, covering episodes 11 and 12 in Andor Season 1, I'll talk about how this motif of sound continues in this music we hear played on Ferrix, which Bix leans her head out the window to hear. I hope you're able to watch it when it comes out next week. Subscribe if you don't want to miss it. In my previous Andor videos, I talked about the color themes in this show, where rebels wear lots of reds, oranges, and yellows, while the Empire wears lots of whites, blacks, and blues. I also talked about how this connects to a warm versus cold dichotomy between these two sides, where the rebels are seen as on fire and the Empire is seen as cold. These themes continue massively in the Narkina 5 arc, like the suits that inmates wear inside Narkina 5, and how they're all white with orange accents, showing how they're partially owned by the Empire, yet rebels at heart. And what color is Narkina 5? White and blue. In my Arc 1 video, I talk about how Andor's home planet Ferrix is a red planet when seen from space. The Narkina 5 jail itself continues with this white cold color scheme, which one of the supervisors of the facility says reflects the calm sanitary conditions of this operation. Sanitary, like how in my Arc 2 video, I talked about how the ISB looks at themselves as healthcare providers treating sickness across the galaxy. They also sport a disturbing clean, white color in their offices. Mon Mothma's house is a castle of white color too, and she tells Davos Golden,
"It's state property. The rules are strict on Decor. Our choices for change are limited."
When the floor is turned on in Narkina 5, it sports a red color, and when it's turned off, it sports a white color. Kino many times describes the electrified floor as
hot floor!
And in his monologue at the end of episode 10, he describes a powered off floor this way.
All floors are cold.
When the inmates are escaping, you see on the charts that they're represented in yellow and orange colors, and my favorite visual shot of this color scheme are the red lights present as the inmates run up the stairs right here. Marva wears red in episode 7 as she speaks to Andor. Clea wears red as she goes out to meet Vel. Mon wears orange at a party in episode 8, while her husband wears blue. Speaking of her husband, Perrin, Mon says that at 15 years old, he was the Academy Firebrand.
Do you remember Farron at 15?
Oh, let's not.
The Academy Firebrand.
2 squigs again, sir?
Please.
How things change, eh?
I looked up what Firebrand means online, and it's basically someone who is passionate about causes and can speak very well. This explains why, spoiler alert for the next 5 seconds, he is capable of making a rousing speech at his daughter's wedding in Season 2. What's really cool is that Mon looks at Perrin with genuine love and affection as she describes his old self before looking down at the floor. She really did love him once upon a time. What's crazy is that Firebrand also means a piece of burning wood. I've described in other videos how the rebellion represents fire, more specifically, a fire that spreads across the galaxy, and how the Empire represents coldness, the antithesis to this symbol. One part of this arc that really backs up this idea is Andor's flashback to the Empire killing his stepfather Clem on Rick's Road. There's snow falling in these flashbacks, and all the color of Ferrix seems sucked out of the frame. When he sees his father hanging in the square, there's ice on his clothes too. I haven't even talked about the spoken references yet. Andor asks Marva to escape with him from Ferrix, telling her,
"Get out of the cold and damp. Find somewhere warm and easy."
Bix tells Marva in Episode 8,
"Oh, you're freezing."
In Episode 8, Luthen talks with Saw and mentions how he's living in cold caves fighting the Empire. During the Narkina 5 prison break, the workers yell out, "Spark the floor! Spark the floor!" They could have said, "Turn the floors on," but no, we get a reference to sparks, which I already detailed in my Arc 1 video, are heavily connected to Andor being the spark of the rebellion visually in those first 3 episodes. There's also a lot of sparks in frame as the inmates escape. Later on, one of the supervisors on Narkina 5 says they need to
burn a firewall around it. Try the whole level. Make the epicenter 5-2.
Fry, as in cook or burn, firewall, as in, fire. One last thing. It's interesting that the planet Andor goes to escape the Empire is a warm, tropical planet with a beach. It really shows the lengths the Empire is going to crack down on the galaxy. Speaking of this claustrophobic, trapped feel to these episodes, if you can't even escape the Empire's reach at a vacation destination, where else can you go? In my Aldhani arc video, I talked about how a theme of climbing was present in those episodes. That theme continues in the Narkina 5 arc. For instance, in Episode 7, Andor tells Bix,
"Remember when your father caught me climbing over that wall?"
When Lonnie goes to visit Luthen at the end of Episode 10, he takes an elevator and climbs hundreds of stories up to see him. In the elevator, Lonnie tells Luthen,
"There's a new supervisor rising. They're Dramiro."
And in Luthen's monologue that happens in this same scene, he says,
"I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I looked down, there was no longer any ground beneath my feet."
Luthen also reminds Lonnie how, over the last few years, he's climbed the ranks of the Empire because of information he provided. But nothing proves this climbing motif more than what happens inside Narkina 5, when the inmates organize a prison break and use the arrival of a new inmate to commandeer the loading dock, climb on top of it, and take control from Empire workers. This shot I already talked about of inmates ascending the stairs plays into this theme as well, and every inmate in this facility arrives at the very top, only to jump down into the water to freedom. Let's talk about the lowest possible point you can find though, the floor. There's many shots of shoes, boots, and feet on floors in this arc. This obviously represents where most people under Empire rule find themselves, under the boot of the Empire, as low as the dirty floor. It reminds me of something Nemik says in the Aldhani arc.
"Surprise from above is never as shocking as one from below."
Shocking. Interesting. Given how the floor in Narkina 5 literally shocks the inmates from the ground up, it fits perfectly with what Nemik is saying. And when I think about electricity, another word that comes to mind is power, like turning on the power to a grid or a light or something.
"They just killed 100 men to keep them quiet. What would you call that?"
I'd call that power.
Power doesn't panic.
And in the ISB meeting in Episode 7, Colonel Yularen says,
"We know the real shock will be when they discover how ready and eager we are to respond."
It's a really sly connection the Andor creators seem to be making here between the electricity of Narkina 5, how we sometimes call electricity power, and the actual power of the Empire. Remember what Andor and Kino do as soon as they reach the command center? They shut off the power, which is hydro-generated, by the way. How else is power generated? By burning things, right? Almost like the rebellion has a power source of their own, fire, which we've already established is tied to them as a motif in this show. Nemik's words were prophetic. In this facility where the Empire uses electric floors to keep everyone in line, they organize a prison riot and surprise the Empire from below, delivering the real shock. It's just masterful writing. I've already talked your ear off too much. What did you notice about Andor's Narkina 5 arc? Let me know down below. Also, I'd love your opinion about which movies and TV shows to cover next. Comment down below any ideas you have. I hope I'll see you next week when I cover Andor's last arc of Season 1, Episodes 11 and 12.